Said, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. In your response to Humayra, I believe, on if Israel was safer today, you said that Israel has degraded Hamas, apparently a great deal, and so on. So I want to ask you, why the need to continue to bomb 10 places and places where Palestinians are advised to go to for safe havens and so on, with F-35s and bombs that are 2,000 pounds?
So
why is there a need to continue to do this kind of bombing?
So I'm not going to speak to any particular decision about what kind of strike to use, but they continue to engage with Hamas forces in Gaza because Hamas forces continue to pose a threat. But Said, that just goes to the point that I was making, that they will never end the conflict in Gaza through a military response as well. Mm-hmm. It is going to take a political approach, it is going to take a different governance approach, and it's going to take an approach that means that something other than Hamas, and it can't be Israel, it can't be the IDF, but something other than Hamas is in Gaza governing.
Mm-hmm. But Israel continues to use these bombs, these huge bombs. In fact, bombing a coffee shop in the West Bank, which is an area they control. They should not be bombing by, aerial bombardment, coffee shops and so on. But you mentioned a point that takes me to my other point. Israel seems to be cutting off the north of Gaza from the south. They're basically, what is underway is nothing short of ethnic cleansing. Now, you all along have said, and the president, I think the secretary said that, I'm not so sure whether the president said that or not, but you don't want to see Gaza reoccupied. You don't want to see any part of Gaza reoccupied. Are you aware of these reports, and do you have a response to them?
We have seen these reports. Let me state first very clearly that no, we do not want to see Gaza occupied by Israel. We do not want to see the territory of Gaza shrunk in any way on a permanent basis. And when it comes to these reports, we are engaging with the government of Israel to find out exactly what it is they intend. But I will say, just generally speaking, we want to see people in Gaza be able to return to their neighborhoods, not being forced to leave their neighborhoods. Now, if there are Hamas militants operating underneath an apartment building, before Israel launches a strike on those militants, I think you would want to see the civilians evacuated. That would be something that would be a good thing for those civilians to see that they are out of harm's way. But it gets back to this broader point that I made, which is as long as you don't have a political path forward, and you don't have a solution to the very real governance questions, you can kill Hamas fighters, but Hamas will continue to recruit other fighters and continue to put the Palestinian people in danger and continue to endanger Israeli security as well.
That will give Israel a cause for continuing this war. I mean, nobody expected a year ago that this war would be going on at this time, but it is. And it can conceivably go on for many more months, maybe even years, and so on. What is the end game? What are you, in your view, what is the end game of Israel?
We want to see a ceasefire that brings the hostages home, that alleviates the suffering of the Palestinian people, that allows humanitarian aid to surge into Gaza. We want to see an agreement on a political path forward that ensures that Palestinians can choose their own leaders and that Hamas does not continue to reign as a terrorist organization over Gaza. And ultimately, we want to see Gaza and the West Bank reunited as an independent Palestinian state.
Now, let me ask you about
that means that when you answered, you say you don't want to see Gaza reoccupied by Israel. You also don't want the West Bank occupied by Israel, right?
We want to see establishment of an independent Palestinian state in Israel. Yes, correct.
So you don't want the Israelis to be occupying the West Bank.
We want it to be.
Right.
We want it to be ultimately its own independent Palestinian state, occupied by Israel, not occupied by Israel or anybody else. No, we want to see it governed by Palestinians.
And then just secondly, and I've asked this, and I know others have asked this before, but when you talk about how you want a ceasefire in Gaza so that people can return to their neighborhoods and their homes, how many neighborhoods and homes do you think are left for them to return to?
So by various estimates, somewhere around half the buildings, maybe a little over half the buildings 50%. In Gaza have been destroyed or damaged. There are other buildings, obviously, that remain, and we want to see people be able to return to their neighborhoods. And if they don't have homes, we want to see the ability to rebuild them, which is why one of the pieces we have said has to be a priority for the ultimate end of this conflict is reconstruction effort, so people can rebuild their neighborhoods and rebuild their homes, because the devastation has been absolutely catastrophic
Then
across Gaza.
who do you think should pay for that?
Ultimately, it would require an international effort with multiple countries contributing. We don't, obviously, that's the kind of thing that would have to be worked out. We're not at that stage yet because we're not even at the end of the conflict.
Okay, fine.
But
But what countries should be included in this?
it's the type of thing that will be the subject of many diplomatic
Can
conversations.
I get to the very specific point here? Do you think Israel should contribute to this?
I think we are a long way from the reconstruction of Gaza, and I'm not going to make any pronouncements from the podium about who should pay for the reconstruction before we get into what would be a
I'm not asking
diplomatic.
who should pay, if someone should pay for everything, but who should contribute? Would the U.S. be willing to contribute?
It's not something we can speak to because these are conversations that will happen
All right.
well down the road.
Let me just continue with a couple of questions. Although it was Israel that dropped close to 50,000 tons of bombs on Gaza, rendering where it is now. So maybe they ought to pay for it.
In response
But-
to a war that Hamas
Right,
started,
that's
so maybe
okay,
Hamas
but-
should pay to rebuild
Right.
Gaza. I mean, it's
Let me
a
ask you-
complicated question is the
Right.
point.
Let me ask you about a report in Drop Site. And it says that Secretary Blinken approved a policy to bomb 8 trucks. That's what an Israeli cabinet member said. Are you aware of this report, and do you have any comment on it?
I am aware of the report, and I'm glad you asked me about it. Look, the suggestion that we in any way signed off on bombing humanitarian convoys is absurd. It's just not true. Of course, Israel has the right to target Hamas militants. That has always been the case. And so look, if you had a situation where Hamas commandeered a convoy and Hamas militants were operating a convoy, of course Israel would have the right to strike those militants. That's not been the situation that we've seen over the past year, except in some very limited circumstances. There have been a few reports here and there of Hamas commandeering convoys. In most cases, returned quickly to the humanitarian organizations. It has not been, there's not been any widespread evidence that we have seen of Hamas actually taking convoys and commandeering them, which is, I think, the scenario or the proposition of this scenario presumes. So the strikes that Israel has conducted on humanitarian convoys have been times when they have had failures in their deconfliction processes, where they have had intelligence failures, and when they've just made basic mistakes. And the thing that we have made clear about those is that those mistakes are unacceptable, and that humanitarian workers need to be protected, and humanitarian aid needs to be protected. So the idea that anyone at this department signed off on bombing humanitarian convoys is just absolutely ridiculous.
My final one, the president today issued a statement, and he talks about, the anniversary. He talks about, 1,200 Jews were killed, which is the highest number since the Holocaust and so on. But he did not mention the genocide that the Palestinians are subject to. He did not mention the fact that 42,000 people were killed. In fact, a group of American doctors are saying 119,000 have been killed. Is that negligence on his part, or is he not showing the kind of sensitivity that he ought to show?
So, Saeed, he didn't use
empathy.
He didn't use the terms that you use because we don't agree with those terms. But if you look at the president's statement, if you look at the statement from the vice president, if you look at the statement from the secretary, every one of them made clear that the consequences of this war for the Palestinian people have been catastrophic, and that's why we're ultimately working to end the war.